My mother's face was a mask of pale, slack-jawed disbelief. Before her stood Mrs. Gable, the city's most feared and respected wedding planner, a woman whose calm demeanor could freeze fire. She spoke with chilling precision. "Ma'am, per the explicit terms of the bridal integrity clause in the master agreement, your and your daughter Chloe's access to this venue is hereby revoked." My mother, a woman who believed Chloe's feelings were more important than anyone's boundaries, finally found her voice. "What agreement? I paid for this wedding," she sputtered, her indignation ringing hollow in the quiet room. Mrs. Gable didn't even blink. "No, ma'am. You made a financial gift. Your daughter," she said, gesturing toward me, "is the sole signatory and financier. Security will now escort you from the bridal suite." Just 30 minutes earlier, my heart had been soaring. I walked into the bridal suite ready to step into the happiest moment of my life. And then, it just stopped. Everything inside me went cold and still. There was my sister Chloe, the family's golden child who had spent her life coasting on charm and other people's efforts. She was standing in front of the mirror, preening an M-I custom-designed wedding dress. My grandmother's heirloom diamond earrings, the ones my grandma had placed, in my hand and told me were for this exact day, were dripping from her ears. It wasn't just the dress. It was the time she borrowed my university tuition money for a trip to Bali. The time she took my car for a joyride and acted surprised when it came back with a dent. It was a lifetime of my most precious things being treated as her playthings. My mother was beaming, snapping photos with her phone as if this were a cherished memory. "Doesn't she look beautiful?" Mom gushed, turning to me with a wide, oblivious smile. I just wanted her to feel like a bride, too. Just for a moment, the air grew thick and heavy. I saw the delicate seams of my dress straining at the shoulders and the faint smudge of Chloe's foundation on the lace collar. A quiet, dangerous calm washed over me. I looked past my mother, directly at my sister's reflection, and spoke. "Take them off, or this wedding is over." Chloe laughed, a high-pitched, dismissive sound. My mother rolled her eyes, the familiar gesture of a parent placating a difficult child. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she sighed. "You always have to make everything about rules and procedures." She called me dramatic. She had no idea the entire day was governed by a set of rules she couldn't see, rules I had written myself. To understand the reckoning that followed, you have to understand that I wasn't just a bride. I was the architect of this entire event, and they had just violated the master blueprint. To them, my life was a collection of beige folders and fine print. I remember a family dinner a few years back, the kind my mother, a woman who treated every gathering like a royal court proceeding, would orchestrate. My sister Chloe had just landed a non-speaking role in a regional car commercial. She was the girl in the background, smiling as the car drove by. My father, Robert, a man who valued flash over substance, acted as if she'd won an Oscar. He popped a bottle of champagne, the cork hitting the ceiling with a dramatic flourish, and gave a grand toast to his rising star. The whole family cheered, their faces glowing in the candlelight as they fawned over her 5 seconds of screen time. Later that evening, when there was a lull in the conversation, I tried to share my own news. I mentioned, quietly, that I had just passed the bar exam in a second state, a notoriously difficult one, opening up huge opportunities for my career. My father, still beaming from Chloe's triumph, simply patted my hand. "That's nice, honey," he said, his eyes already scanning the room for someone more interesting to talk to. "More paperwork, huh?" That's when the nickname started. They called me the Notary. It was a joke at first, but it stuck. To them, my entire career, the years of law school, the grueling exams, the immense responsibility, was boiled down to the act of stamping a document. I was rigid. I was unemotional. I was the boring administrative background to Chloe's vibrant creative spirit. They had no capacity to understand that my world of rules and procedures was anything other than a gray, passionless existence. That perception couldn't have been further from the truth. My world wasn't gray. It was forged from steel and glass, high above the city in the offices of a top-tier asset protection firm. I wasn't a notary, I was a fortress architect, and my building materials were words. Just a week before the wedding, I was in a sterile, glass-walled boardroom, the air thick with tension. On the other side of the polished mahogany table sat a billionaire's smug legal team, trying to poke holes in a prenuptial agreement I had drafted for our client. They postured and blustered, but I remained calm. I let them finish, then methodically dismantled their entire argument, my voice never rising above a conversational tone. Your client's attempt to classify the Geneva property as a marital asset is a non-starter, I stated, tapping a clause on my tablet. We have bulletproofed the asset tracing for all premarital holdings, and the paper trail is indisputable. I leaned forward slightly. Furthermore, any commingling of funds from the offshore accounts, as you've just suggested, will trigger an immediate and irreversible breach of fiduciary duty. We both know what that means for his board appointments. The lead attorney's face tightened. The room was silent. Later, my senior partner, Mr. Sterling, a man whose respect was earned in blood and billable hours, caught me by my office door. He just nodded, a rare smile touching his lips. Your contracts are ironclad, he said. Absolutely impenetrable. In that world, I wasn't the notary. I was a guardian, a strategist, a weapon. I had power, and I had respect. Only one person really saw both of my lives, my best friend and maid of honor, Jenna. She's a brilliant ER doctor who understood high-stakes environments and had watched my family's dynamic for years with a surgeon's diagnostic eye. A week before the wedding, a text from her lit up my phone. It was a screenshot of a message from my mom, followed by Jenna's own warning. The message read, Your mom just called to ask what size shoe Chloe wears. Said she wanted to get her matching bridal slippers. Be careful. My stomach tightened. It was the little things, the constant chipping away at boundaries, the endless campaign to make Chloe feel special at my expense. I called my mother, trying to keep my voice light. I asked her about the slippers, and her response was the same excuse she'd used my entire life. Oh, sweetie, don't be like that, she'd sighed, her voice dripping with manufactured patience. You're so successful and independent, you're strong. You don't need all the little bits of attention like she does. Chloe's life is so much more uncertain. She just needs these little boosts to her confidence. Her words landed like familiar, dull blows. My strength was not a resource for her to draw from to coddle my sister. My independence wasn't a justification for their neglect. It was the same logic they used when they gave Chloe the down payment for a condo while I was paying off my own student loans. I was the responsible one, so I could handle it. They didn't see my success as something to be celebrated. They saw it as a reason to overlook me. For years, I had accepted their narrative. Chloe was the star, and I was the stage manager. But they fundamentally misunderstood my job. I didn't just manage the stage, I owned it. I designed it, and I wrote the terms of use. Their laughter echoed in the bridal suite, a sharp, ugly sound that chipped away at the last of my patience. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry or throw things or give them the satisfaction of a dramatic scene. Instead, a profound and chilling calm settled over me. I walked past them as if they were nothing more than furniture, retrieved a cold bottle of water from the mini fridge, and retreated into the small adjoining room, closing the door softly behind me. My face in the mirror was a mask of cold fury. The hurt was there, of course. A familiar, dull ache. But something else rose to meet it, something cold and clear and precise. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a material breach of contract. My family thought I was just being dramatic, that my threat was as hollow as all the other times I'd tried to draw a line in the sand. But they had underestimated me for the last time. I had anticipated this. Not this exact scenario, but something like it. A lifetime with them had taught me that their chaos was predictable. When my parents had generously offered to pay for the wedding, I had insisted on managing all the vendor agreements myself, waving off their questions by saying it was just my detail-oriented nature. They were happy to be free of the boring paperwork. What they didn't know was that I structured their contribution not as a payment, but as a formal, non-refundable gift into an account that I solely controlled. I was the only signatory on every single document. They had willingly, legally, signed away every shred of their authority. With steady hands, I pulled out my phone, my movements deliberate and sure. I bypassed the texts from my fiancé and friends and opened the master file I had prepared for this very day. I navigated to the venue agreement, a document I knew as well as my own name, and scrolled to a specific section I had drafted myself. Clause 11 billions, the Bridal Integrity Clause. It was a beautiful piece of legal work. It explicitly stated that the bride's attire, role, and official status were core, non-negotiable components of the event. Any attempt by any guest to usurp these elements would constitute an immediate breach granting the signatory, me, the absolute right to have the offending parties removed from the premises by venue security without discussion or refund. I switched apps and sent a single coded text to Mrs. Gable, a woman who appreciated precision above all else. The message was simple: execute protocol 11 billions. Immediate effect. Her reply came back in less than 5 seconds. Confirmed. En route to you now? My mother thought her checkbook gave her power. She was about to learn the difference between a contributor and a contracting party, the hard way. I emerged from the adjoining room just as my mother was ramping up into a full-blown guilt trip. She stood with her hands on her hips, her face flushed with a righteous anger that had always worked on me before. Are you really going to ruin your perfect day over one little dress-up session? She asked, her voice dripping with the condescending tone she reserved for my supposed overreactions. Your father and I paid for this whole fairy tale. The words hung in the air, the same old weapon she'd always used. Money. Her financial contributions had never been a gift. They were a leash, a tool for control that she used to justify everything from criticizing my choice of apartment to demanding we host holidays. For a moment, I saw it all. Every check she ever wrote that came with unspoken strings. Every passive-aggressive comment about the cost of my education. This wasn't about a wedding. This was about a lifetime of being treated like a subsidiary in my own life. Before I could even form a reply, there was a firm, decisive knock on the door. The door swung open to reveal the steely Mrs. Gable, flanked by 2 uniformed yet discreet venue security guards. They were tall, impassive, and looked utterly unflappable. Mrs. Gable completely ignored my mother and sister, her eyes finding mine immediately. She gave a slight, respectful nod. "Ma'am," she said, her voice a model of professional deference. "We are ready to proceed as per your instructions." The word "ma'am" landed in the room like a thunderclap. My mother's jaw tightened. In her world, she was the one who was always in charge, the one who commanded that kind of respect. Mrs. Gable then turned her cool, analytical gaze upon my mother, her expression as unreadable as a legal document. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The air of manicured chaos my mother thrived on was instantly replaced by a cold corporate order. "I paid for this," my mother shrieked, her voice cracking as she pointed a trembling finger at me. "This is my party. I'm the one paying for all of this." Mrs. Gable didn't even flinch at the outburst. Instead, she calmly held up a tablet, the screen glowing with a scanned document. "With all due respect, that is incorrect," she stated, her tone flat and final. "Your name is not on this document, ma'am." She angled the screen so my mother could clearly see the signature page. My signature, bold and clear, was on the signatory line. There was nothing else. "You are listed on the vendor payment schedule as a gift contributor. All financial inputs were legally designated as non-refundable gifts to the bride, per the rider you signed last month." Mrs. Gable swiped the screen. "Clause 11 billions of the master agreement has been irrevocably breached. Please gather your belongings." It was a complete, systematic dismantling of her entire worldview. Chloe, predictably, burst into loud, theatrical tears, the kind that had always worked to get her out of trouble. But this time, no one was watching. All eyes were on my mother. Her face was a slow-motion collage of shock, rage, and finally, a deep, corroding humiliation. I could see the moment the truth landed. Her gaze flickered from the damning contract on the tablet to me, her quiet, boring notary daughter. She was seeing me, really seeing me for the first time, not as her child, but as an authority she could not appeal to, a system she could not manipulate. I was no longer the stage manager. I was the executive producer, and she had just been written out of the show. She stood there, frozen, as one of the guards gestured politely but firmly towards the door. The silence was absolute. I let it hang for a moment, then I spoke, my voice devoid of emotion. "You wanted her to feel like a bride. Instead, you made sure she wouldn't even be a guest. In my world, the fine print is everything. And they had just learned that some clauses have consequences you can't emotionally blackmail your way out of." After the door clicked shut behind them, a profound silence filled the bridal suite. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was clean. It was peaceful. Jenna, my brilliant, steady best friend, was the first to speak, her voice a mixture of shock and awe. "You just legally evicted your own mother and sister from your wedding." A small, genuine smile touched my lips for the first time that day. I didn't feel a surge of vengeful triumph. just an immense, grounding relief. It felt like a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted from my shoulders. A weight of obligation, of expectation, of constantly shrinking myself to manage their feelings. I took a deep, steadying breath, walked over to the dress that now hung pristine and waiting, and began to get ready. The ceremony was perfect. Without their suffocating presence, without the constant undercurrent of their drama, the air was lighter. I was surrounded by my fiancé, Mark, a man who loved my strength instead of resenting it, his warm and wonderful family who had welcomed me without reservation, and friends who saw me for exactly who I was. As I said my vows, I knew I was stepping into a life I had not just chosen, but actively protected. 6 months later, that feeling of protected peace had become the foundation of my new life. I was in my corner office, the city skyline sprawling out before me like a promise. On my desk, nestled between legal files, were photos from our wedding day, not a single one clouded by forced smiles or family tension. My husband, Mark, an architect who understood the importance of a solid foundation, came in with a cup of coffee, just the way I like it. He kissed the top of my head, his presence a quiet comfort. He had been my rock that day, his unwavering support the final confirmation that I had made the right choice. As I took a sip of coffee, an email notification popped up on my screen. The subject line read, "Client referral." It was from Mrs. Gable. The message was brief and to the point. She was forwarding the contact information for a high-profile client. They required an ironclad cohabitation agreement, and she wrote, they were most impressed by my contractual foresight. It turned out that enforcing my own boundaries was the best business decision I'd ever made. That afternoon, as I was preparing the initial file for my new clients, my phone buzzed on the desk. A long text message from my father appeared on the screen. I felt a familiar reflexive tightening in my stomach as I read his words. It was a masterclass in non-apology, a rambling paragraph of blame disguised as concern. Your mother is just devastated," he wrote. "Pai, she can't even talk about it. You were always so rigid with the rules, you know that. You never learned to bend. Chloe just idolizes you, that's all it ever was. I don't know how we're supposed to fix this if you won't even speak to us." He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking me to fix the mess they had made, to once again be the responsible one, the notary for their emotional baggage. For a single, fleeting moment, the old frustration flickered inside. Me, the muscle memory of a lifetime of being their designated adult. But then, just as quickly as it came, the feeling was gone. It was replaced by a calm, quiet distance. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. There was nothing. No emotional pull, no sense of obligation. The contract had been breached, and the terms of our relationship had been irrevocably altered. I didn't need to fight anymore because the case was already closed. I turned my phone and showed the text to Mark. He read it, shook his head slowly, and squeezed my shoulder. A simple gesture that said everything. I didn't reply to the message. I didn't engage. I simply held my finger on the screen and archived the conversation, sending it into a digital folder where it could no longer reach me. My phone went back on the desk, face down. I turned to the new client file, ready to build another fortress. My mother thought a wedding was just a party where everyone should feel special. I knew it was a contract, and the most important clause is the one that protects your own peace. If you've ever had to use your professional skills to draw a personal boundary, share your story below. In this community, your terms and conditions are always respected.